All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're exploring a framework that completely blew my mind, and honestly, it's going to change how you see the world. We're crossing the lines between abstract mathematics, theoretical physics, astronautics, and even global economics. And the wildest part? We're tying it all together with just one single revolutionary framework. So think about this. Why do markets suddenly crash? Massive rockets stall out, and fundamental equations just break? Well, it turns out they all share a universal vulnerability, and that's the problem of scale. You see, whether we're talking about nature or human-made systems, things tend to grow fine right up until they inevitably snap. And why does that happen? Because we falsely assume that 1 plus 1 plus 1 is just going to work forever. We figure if a rule works at a tiny scale, we can just keep adding to it indefinitely. But as we're about to see, the universe absolutely does not allow unconstrained addition. And that brings us to the big reveal, the solution to this whole universal vulnerability. It's called Scale-Regulated Aggregation, or SRA, and its core engine is known as the AM regulator. Think of this as nature's structural safety valve. This framework actually proves that additivity, the simple act of just accumulating things linearly, is a conditional rule. When things reach large scales, systems literally have to transition to multiplicative regulation just to prevent catastrophic divergence. Put simply, there's a mathematical governor built directly into reality, and its whole job is stepping in to stop systems from blowing up. Okay, here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, the crisis of scale. Second, the AM regulator solution. Third, bounding math and physics. Fourth, rocket scaling and saturation. Fifth, macroeconomic and fiscal stability. And finally, number 6, zero-latency SRA software. Let's get into it. Section 1, the crisis of scale. Unregulated aggregation. To really get this, we have to understand that divergence across complex systems arises primarily from unregulated aggregation rather than intrinsic instability. Basically, systems don't fail because their fundamental local rules are flawed, not at all. They fail because they lack a regulatory constraint when they start scaling up. The local physics are totally fine. It's the unconstrained, massive accumulation of those local effects that eventually breaks the whole system. Section 2, the AM regulator solution, structural safety valve. Think of it like this. Imagine a cup sitting under a running faucet. Additive accumulation is just the water continually filling the cup. It's unbounded growth, localized dominance, and ultimately it leads to a chaotic overflow, which is our divergence or instability. Multiplicative regulation, on the other hand, is like a natural overflow valve. It senses the scale of the water and safely caps the volume, ensuring bounded saturation and global dominance. So it lets the local addition happen, but strictly enforces a global limit to maintain structural stability. Section 3, bounding math and physics, equations under stress. Now, it is absolutely fascinating that this exact same regulatory structure stabilizes our most complex equations. The AM regulator actually bounds the Riemann hypothesis, literally controlling the density of prime numbers so they don't spiral out of mathematical control. And at the exact same time, it smooths out the Navier-Stokes equations, which govern fluid dynamics, preventing these explosive energy cascades in turbulent fluid flows. So we've got a single structural rule keeping both prime numbers and turbulent water flows from mathematically blowing up. Crazy, right? And the data totally backs this up. Normally, in standard additive models, errors just keep blowing up as the system gets larger. But watch what happens with prime aggregation when the AM regulator is applied. As the scale grows from 10 to the third to 10 to the fourth and then 10 to the fifth, the relative error actually drops, going from 0.14 down to 0.12 and then 0.10. The system literally becomes more stable under stress because the regulator forces bounded accumulation. Section 4, rocket scaling and saturation. Let's pivot and apply this to shooting thousands of tons of metal into space, specifically looking at the Starship and LVM-3 launch vehicles. Standard rocket engineering assumes a pretty straightforward deal. Add more propellant, get a proportional increase in payload delivery. But empirical data throws a huge wrench in that. Packing more and more fuel into massive rockets like Starship or scaling up platforms like the LVM-3 doesn't actually yield proportional payload gains. Why? Because of momentum saturation. The system essentially gets too heavy to efficiently benefit from its own added fuel. Just listen to these numbers because the instability gradient is striking. Scaling standard architectures like the LVM-3 might give you a 159% mass increase, but you only get a 79% payload gain. That is sublinear. But then, when you scale all the way up to projected Starship levels, mass shoots up by a massive 252%, yet payload efficiency only bumps up 57%. strongly sublinear. You simply cannot keep adding propellant indefinitely. But by applying the AM regulator's constraint-regulated correction to these models, space agencies can reduce performance variance by nearly 40%. They can optimize their payload expectations without having to completely redesign the rocket's propulsion from scratch. Section 5. Macroeconomic and Fiscal Stability. Now we shift from rockets to money, and this is a total game changer for economics. When we compare raw instability versus AM-regulated instability, the difference is night and day. In the household sector, an inflation shock drives raw instability up to 1.32, but the regulator slices that down to 0.55. For government macro systems, it drops from 0.88 to 0.47. And in a global financial system crisis, a truly terrifying 1.60 raw instability is spectrally compressed down to a highly manageable 0.57. It's essentially cutting extreme volatility in half, shifting economic systems completely out of volatile crisis regimes and safely into moderate stable bands. So what does that mathematical compression actually mean in the real world? We are talking about roughly $0.8 to $1.2 trillion in estimated systemic loss avoidance across the global financial system during a crisis shock. Let that sink in. This proves that scale-regulated aggregation is not just some fun math puzzle for academics. It literally avoids catastrophic economic collapse and saves massive, tangible amounts of money. Section 6. Zero-latency SRA software. Bringing this all together, the mathematical kernel of the AM regulator isn't some clunky model that takes days to process. It is a closed-form, deterministic algorithm, meaning it can be deployed with absolute zero latency. This SRA software suite is actively being deployed right now into macroeconomic dashboards for central banks, corporate risk systems, financial market monitoring, real-time trading analytics, and cloud APIs. The second a high-frequency financial feed measures a fluctuation, that stabilization adjustment is applied instantaneously. And the best part? It operates with a 100% theoretical confidence level. Because it uses closed-form spectral compression, it achieves deterministic results immediately at the point of measurement. There's no guessing, there's no endless iteration, and nobody's crossing their fingers hoping it works. It regulates the data directly at the source, perfectly every single time. We've seen how unregulated addition causes turbulence in water, heavy inefficiencies in our largest rockets, and devastating crashes in the global economy. And we've seen how the AM regulator provides the exact structural safety valve to fix all of it, which really leaves us with one incredibly provocative question. If the exact same mathematical limit governs our rockets, our money, and the fundamental equations of the universe, what else out there is just waiting to be regulated? Think about that the next time you catch yourself assuming that more is always better. Thanks for hanging out for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.